All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to vlog number, whatever this is. I can't go into the future and figure out what vlog number we're at, but I'm sure future me will tell you as we're editing. Anyhow, we're heading in for our cash game session. We did really well last night. We were up 850. Hopefully we can keep running that up because we came back down a lot from Vegas. Even though we were playing great in tournaments, we were absolutely exhausted and just did not have the patience for cash, unfortunately. The situation is what it is. Now we're back into grind mode. We lost half our bankroll, so we have to knit up and try to build it back up to where it was, and then kind of go from there. So I will catch you guys in a bit once we actually get there. All
right, ladies and gentlemen, so we bought in for $200. Our stack kind of went up and down a little bit. We currently have 120. We are on the big blind with ace deuce suited. Our stack's a little bit short to be calling with this hand here, to be honest, but since we're only playing 5-handed, it's hard to fold a suited ace on the big blind, especially when there's already 3 callers behind. So we go ahead and put in the call for $20 here, and then we get a phenomenal flop for our hand, Jack 9-10 with 2 diamonds. We flopped the nut flush draw, but if I jam, I don't think I'm gonna get anybody off of a pair, considering I only have about a pot size bet. So I decided to go the opposite route and bet $20, hoping that everybody will call with any sort of straight draw or a jack, maybe even a 10 for this size. Unfortunately, the player immediately after us decides to raise to $65, which gets the cutoff and the button out of the way. Now that he has that much money in the middle, we're just gonna gamble at this point, hope to hit our flush here, so we go all in for not too much more. He obviously calls right away, so we go heads up to this turn and river, which comes the 8 of spades and then the queen of diamonds, giving us the nuts. Pretty straightforward hand here, nothing too crazy to dissect. We just had the right price to chase a flush and we got there, but we always like to include the first big win of the session. About 20 minutes go by, we have $300 in our stack still when we straddle for $6 under the gun. We get raised by the cutoff to 20, the button calls to 20. I look down at queen 10 offsuit and decide that 5-handed, this hand is good enough to see a flop with. If we were playing a full ring game, I would definitely just let this one go, but we're not playing a full ring game and I'm not letting it go. Anyhow, $63 in the middle. We go to this run out 3 ways. The board comes out queen 3-7 with 2 diamonds. I checked in the dark, so our opponent in the cutoff bets $25. The button quickly calls, and to those of you that are a bit newer, checking in the dark just means that I checked before the cards actually came out, so it's essentially a blind bet. Anyhow, we do put in the call for $25 here with top pair. The turn comes a 2 of hearts. Doesn't change too much on this board. I continue my line of being weak here with our top pair and check over to the pre-flop aggressor. He does in fact put in the check back, but then the button takes an aggressive line here and decides to bet out for $45. I don't think that 2 of hearts helped him, so I put in the call. The cutoff ends up folding his hand, so we go heads up to this river, which comes an 8 of hearts. I check one more time here with plans to let our opponent fire here, and fire he does for $100. Now I'm just gonna make sure to take some time to make the right decision here. The only thing we're really worried about is a queen with a bigger kicker. If our opponent had queen jack, queen king, or ace queen, would he play the hand this way? I think ace queen and king queen makes sense. I think queen jack probably not. It's also possible that our opponent has a flush draw and just missed, and since we checked it to him on the river, he could be bluffing at this, which is part of the reason that I checked it over to him, try and get value from a missed flush draw. And on the flip side, he could think that we have a missed flush draw because we checked it to him for 3 streets but called on the flop and turn. So in my head, we either have the opponent crushed with just a pair, or he has us dominated, so we can put in a call, but we definitely cannot put in a raise. And after thinking of all the different hands our opponent could have, I think that it's far more likely that we have the best hand with top pair and a 10 kicker. So ultimately, I do elect to throw in the call. Our opponent says you're good. I show my queen, and he returns his cards to the dealer face down. Another 20 minutes or so go by, and we pick up another player, but then we are missing one for this PLO Bomb Pot here. Since we're 5-handed, I decide to take a small stab at this pot with just a pair of kings here. here. Bit unorthodox and don't recommend typically doing this in a PLO Bomb Pot because one pair is never good. We pick up 2 callers and go to this turn 3 ways. An ace of clubs comes on the turn now, giving us top 2 pair with a 10 high flush draw. We also have a gut shot to the straight with a jack. And when the ace of diamonds peels off on the river, we actually river the nuts here with aces full of kings for top boat. I bet $35 here, hoping to get a call from the other opponents. And then the villain after us decides to hit the cap here for $70 total. The PLO bomb pots are only played at dealer change here at Outlaws every 30 minutes, and the game is capped at 100. So this is the maximum that we're going to be able to make in this hand here. We obviously put in the call with the nuts, show our opponent the bad news, and we take down this $250 pot. Shortly after this hand, we got called over to the main game, so we racked up our chips and headed over there. We turned our original $200 into a little over 600, which I was feeling absolutely great about until we got onto the bigger game and I saw how big these stacks were over here. Luckily, we have enough money that we won't get pushed around too bad. Let's see if we can make anything happen. Sometimes when you're playing poker, you don't catch any hands, don't get to play for a few hours, but that does not seem to be the case tonight. We look down a queen jack suited on the cutoff. There's a $10 button straddle, 1 caller in between, and when the action got back to me, I decided to just put in the call. Normally in this position with this strong of a hand, I'd like to raise, but I don't know how anybody's playing on the table yet, so I want to get some information before I start making these types of decisions, especially when we're playing this deep. 43 in the middle, we're going to this flop 4 ways, and the board runs out king 10 9 rainbow. Flop the straight, and there are no redraws to a flush available. To make things even better, one of our opponents leads out here for $20. I just put in the smooth call, the button folds, and now we are going heads up to this turn, which comes a 4 of hearts. This doesn't change anything on the board besides the fact that it puts a heart flush draw out there. My boy Anthony decides to continue betting here for about $60. Since he bet about 3/4 of the pot, considering how wet this board is, it feels to me like he's trying to protect his hand, so his hand feels very strong, potentially a hand like 2 pair or a set that doesn't want to see a 4-card straight or a flush get there. So keeping this in mind, I think he's going to call a raise, so I decide to bump it up here. I go 125, which is basically a min click, only $5 more than a minimum raise here. I can't imagine that our boy Anthony can get away from this for that amount. The price is just too good regardless of the hand that he has. Then at this point, he grabs a fat stack of greens, slides them over the line. At this point, there's only one hand I can put him on. I go all in, he snap calls, and here's how it went.
I think we might be chopping.
It's not very often that you flop the nuts in poker, and even when you do, it's not always a guarantee that any of your opponents will hit the board or have a hand strong enough to call you. In this rare instance, we had 2 players flop the nuts, and there weren't that many other people involved in the hand. Rather anticlimactic finish, but the hand was super fun to play regardless. Moving on to the next one. An orbit or so later, we look down at king jack offsuit in the hijack. Nobody's called behind me, so I make a small open to $10. The cutoff calls and one of the blinds call, so we go 3 ways to this flop, which comes out 8 king 7 with 2 clubs. The action checks over to me, and I decide to put in a check back for some reason, even though we have top pair on this board with a pretty reasonable kicker. And then the 9 of hearts peels off on the turn. The player in the small blind decides to bet $15. We call the $15, and that's when we see the gentleman in the cutoff grabbing a stack of chips that looks to be significantly more than $15. There's $60 out there now. It's going to be an additional 45 for us to put in the call, and to make matters even worse, the small blind doesn't look affected. He stacks up some chips, throws them in the middle, and at this point I think it's pretty clear that we're beat, so we're gonna have to put in a pretty easy fold. But nope, that's not what we do. We decide to get stubborn with our single pair with a jack kicker and absolutely no redraw here. We're losing to 2 pairs, we're losing to straights and sets, but you know, we put the money in the middle, so we'll see what happens here. And the river brings a 3 of diamonds. This is a complete brick and doesn't change the board at all. all. The small blind goes into the tank for about a minute or so, but eventually decides to throw out a $160 bet here. The action gets back over to me. I know I'm supposed to fold this hand here. There's absolutely no way that we're good, but for some stupid reason, I'm very inclined to call. But I sit there like a good poker player and tell myself that there's no way in heck King Jack is good in this situation. Like I said, I knew already that on the turn I was already behind, but for some reason, sometimes while I'm playing, I just get stubborn and don't want to fold my hand. But eventually I do end up throwing it away. The player in the cutoff huffs and puffs for a second, but ultimately does elect to make the call here. The small blind shows Jack 10 for the turned nuts, and then the cutoff throws his hand away and says he had the bottom end of the straight. Took a while, but we finally found the fold. A few minutes go by and we look down at ace king offsuit under the gun. I decide to raise it to $20. Under the gun +1 ends up calling the $20, and then my boy Anthony decides to bump it up. The price of poker has been increased to $85. The action folds around to me and I am going nowhere with this hand. The player in middle position also puts in the call, so we go 3 ways to this flop with 244 in the middle. The board comes out 8, 9, 10 with 2 hearts. I decide to put in a check here. Don't really feel like stabbing at this into 2 different opponents, but then the ace of hearts comes on the turn. Considering this was a 3-bet pot, if anybody had a pair, a flush draw, or a straight draw on this board, I would have expected to see a bet on the flop. With that in mind, I don't think this 8 of hearts improved either one of our opponent's hands, so I do decide to take a stab at this pot here for $130. I'm pretty sure I have the best hand, but in the event that I am wrong, we still have the king high flush draw. But it looks like our read is right because both opponents end up putting in a fold pretty quickly, and we take down this $370 pot. From this point onward, we got a lot of really good starting hands, some pocket pairs, some suited aces. Didn't really catch too much, so we tried to make something happen and force our way through with our favorite punting hand. You all know what it is. Ace Jack, of course. It's the Monte special and the gift keeps on giving, but to our opponents, not me. From there, we get involved in another PLO Bomb Pot. Unfortunately, we weren't able to hold on that board either. And then Old Reliable comes back to us once again. The Ace Jack, it never fails, right? Completely whiffed the flop and starts setting up a triple barrel bluff. End up chickening out by the river because our opponent felt strong, and we avoid felting ourselves.
All right, guys, doing a quick vlog update. So as you guys have clearly seen in the hands, we ran the stack up to 700-ish, a little over, I believe. We're now down back to 400. I'm only in for 2 on the day, so it's not awful. We have double what we started with, but we didn't really buy in for a lot because it started on the small game and we moved to the big game. I'm feeling like my game's a little off. Kind of want to leave, to be honest. I'm like doing some really weird stuff that's out of character, and now my image is really bad and I have a hard time playing well when my image is bad. I'm not quite convinced I need to leave yet. I think I'm just bored and hungry. So I ordered some chowder. My plan is to now knit up, play really tight, hope somebody calls me when I actually have it. If we can get to like 800 tonight, I'll probably get up, honestly. We have 400, we get 1 big hand where we get a double up. We're up to 8. That's, 4x our buy-in, the profit of $600. Since our bankroll is so small, after we torched half of our money in Vegas, I kind of just want to take the small wins and not risk losing, 1,000, 1,500 a night. So worst case scenario, if I don't catch anything in another hour or so, if I'm really bored, I'll just get up with a $200 profit. It's fine. Like, we don't need to play a long session every single time we come. If I'm not feeling it and I'm feeling off my game and I feel like I'm gonna torch money, there's no point in staying. I'm not gonna play again until next week Thursday, but that's totally fine. I don't care if I end up losing this month with a $5,000 loss, because that's kind of where we're at right now. I think we're like 4,900 in the hole. Let's see when the food gets here, and I will keep you guys posted. Hopefully we hit 800. All right, catch you in a bit.
Our stack was looking a little rough, so I added on for another 400 so we could actually make some money if we hit a big hand. Our stack and EV are prepped and we're good to go to the next one. The next hand of interest, we pick up pocket jacks in the hijack. I decide to bump it up to 15 and we get 5 callers. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, 5 callers. So we have to fade the world on this flop, which runs out deuce, 5, 6 with 2 diamonds. There's a flush draw and a wheel draw out there. So we're gonna bet, but I wanna keep it cheap enough for people to chase whatever they have. I decide to bet 25 into 75, which is about a third of the pot. This should be enough for anybody with a flush or straight draw to come along. The goal is to hopefully get a couple customers so we can build up the size of this pot and go big on the turn. We catch 2 fish on the line, so now we got 150 going into the middle for this pot, and we go off to the turn, which brings us an 8 of hearts. Absolutely great card for us. Both of our opponents check it over to us, and now we're gonna size up. I go $110 here. It's a little over 2/3 of the pot, but unfortunately it doesn't look like either of our opponents could continue for this bet sizing. I'm wondering if I should have kept it a little bit cheaper to keep them in there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. For the next hand, we look down at ace king suited in the small blind. The cutoff raised to 10 and nobody else is involved. I decide to raise this up to 30 to try and build this pot up a bit now. Expect the big blind to get out of the way a lot of the time, but not this time. He ends up putting in the call and the cutoff is going nowhere for $20 more. We go 3 ways to this flop with $90 in the middle, and the board comes out deuce, queen, king with 2 spades. Since we were the pre-flop aggressor, I feel like we're supposed to continue here whether or not we hit. Luckily this time we did, so I decide to fire $40 here. It's a little bit under half the pot. I would ideally like one opponent to call, and looks like this price is right for the big blind because he does in fact put in the call, and then the cutoff comes along as well. So 210 going to this turn, which brings us a 4 of clubs. Once again, a fantastic turn card for us. We're definitely going to bet again, but now the question is how much. Trying to think how much I would be betting if I had just a flush draw and was trying to get people off of this hand. I think I would go pretty close to pot. So with top pair, top kicker, I'm going to make a similar bet sizing to keep ourselves balanced. I go for $175 into 210, leaving myself less than $200 behind. So regardless of what our opponent does here, we're going to put the rest of it in on the river. I guess the argument can be made that I should have just shoved instead of going 175, but I didn't think either opponent would have called a shove. Our opponent goes into the tank for about a minute and a half, but eventually does flick in the call. 560 in the middle, and we go to this river, which brings us the ace of hearts. As planned, we're going to go all in here. Our opponent snap folds, so we end up scooping this pot. That ace could have been a bad card for us if he had an open-ended straight draw. Our opponent had mentioned that he had a lot of outs. Sounds like he had a flush and wheel draw, but he did not get there. The next hand of interest brings us king 9 suited in middle position. Why is this on the vlog, you might ask? Well, because it got ridiculous for no reason. $4 in the middle as we go to this flop 3 ways. Board comes out queen 3-9 with 2 hearts. Why does the board say we have $4 in there? Well, let me explain. For my non-poker players, anytime you're playing cash, the casino makes its money by taking a rake, which is totally fair. The dealer's gotta eat too. Something I've noticed a lot of new players like to do is try to limp into pots as much as possible to try and see a cheap flop, but this is a mistake. I just threw in $3, but I only have the potential to make 4 if I make my hand here. And since I have a pair of 9s with the second nut flush draw, we have a pretty good hand here. But now our betting is going to be very weird because this pot's literally starting in single digit territory. Moral of the story is don't limp for just the big blind. It makes things really weird and you're going to lose a lot of money to the rake. But enough of that, let's get back to the hand. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a pretty good hand with a pair and flush draw, so I throw $5 into the middle. Button quickly calls. Action gets back over to the big blind, who decides to raise it up to 15. Obviously he has a good hand. Let's start building up this pot now. I'm going to re-raise him now, even though all we have is a pair of 9s, but I don't want to raise too much, so I'm going to go ahead and make it $40 to go here. It's only going to be an additional 25 for him to call. We lose the button, which was very expected. That $5 bet on the flop was more of a joke than anything else, and then the big blind decides to put in the call. $87 in the middle, and we go to this turn, which brings us the 5 of hearts. We are instantly rewarded for building the pot, and we hit our flush on the turn. I decided to continue here for about a pot-sized bet of $75. It's a little bit under, but within a few bucks. Our bet raise on the flop was portraying a lot of strength, and we're not going to take our foot off the gas at this point. Our opponent thinks about it for a second and then ends up going all in, and now I am confused. I don't see how this card could possibly help our opponent unless he had the ace high flush draw. That 5 didn't complete any straights. If our opponent had a set, I don't think he would do this when the front door flush draw comes in. Although I did re-raise him on the flop, so maybe he just has air and is trying to get us off of this hand by representing the flush himself, or maybe he has ace queen with the ace of hearts. Either way, his all in is a little over double what I already have out there, so I can't fold the second nuts for this amount. If our opponent had 400 or 500 behind, I might have to think about it a bit longer. Anyhow, we throw in the chip. River brings us an 8 of spades. Our opponent shows 9-3 of diamonds for a flop 2 pair, and our flush is good. A bit surprised to just see a 2 pair there in that spot, but I guess if we didn't have the flush, we probably would have folded, so potentially a good play by our opponent, just didn't work out this time. From this point onwards, we go through a pretty dry spell for the next 2 hours. We get some good starting hands like ace deuce suited, flop a straight and flush draw, but do not get there by the river. Had some face cards in later position, some pocket pairs once again, be they small or big. We couldn't win with either one. We got felted and had to reload for another $500 here. Luckily, I asked the floor to grab the lucky chips from the back that they keep hidden away from everybody else, so we're about to turn this around. We win a small one and then immediately lose all of our profit plus some with some suited connectors, but then we win a PLO Bomb Pot to win a little bit back of what we lost, but we still got a long ways to go. We're now pulling into the early AM hours. It's 12:44, so it's quite late and we're getting pretty tired. But then we look down at two cards with letters on them, which is always a great way to get your blood flow going again. I think pocket jacks are worthy of a raise, especially when there's a $15 straddle on the button and a collar in between. So I decide to bump it up to $65 here, hoping that one of the two villains will put in the call. Things look pretty grim when the button, the small blind, and the big blind all fold, but then the action gets back to the last remaining player and he does decide to put in the call here. And then something interesting happens.
Sure. It's out there. All right.
So as you can see, our opponent checked it over to us in the dark. We bet 100 in the dark, so we go to this run out. The flop comes 5 king 4 with 3 hearts. There's 205 in the middle. Our opponent folds and our pocket jacks are good here. Our opponent asks if we at least had a heart. I have to go take a quick peek because I honestly completely forgot if we had a heart or not, since we threw it in blind, but luckily we did, so we probably would have been pretty good if he had put in the call here. Nothing really to dissect strategy wise. We just got kind of stupid and gambly, so I wanted to share it on the vlog. Obviously we did it with a pretty good hand, but blind betting $100 feels a bit degenerate, so I wanted to share. Moving on to the next one. It's getting pretty late and I'm getting very tired, so it's almost about time to go, but obviously we want to make a little bit more money before we take off because we're stuck a good amount still. We're in the small blind when the middle position opens to $15. The hijack calls, the button calls. I put in the call with ace 10 suited, and then the big blind comes along as well. So there's 5 of us going to this flop, $75 in the middle, and the board runs out 6 ace 9 with 2 hearts. We flop top pair here. I'm not planning on going anywhere, but there's enough people involved that I think a check is okay. Somebody's very likely to stab a lot of the time. Unfortunately, the action checks around, so now when it gets back to me on this king of spades turn, there's 2 flush draws and some straight draws out there, so I go $25 here, which is about a third of the pot. Probably could have gone a bit bigger. I think if I go 50 or 60 bucks with the action on the table, that a lot of players would have called this amount to chase a draw, but I wanted to keep it cheap enough that any ace or even a king would call this bet. The action folds around to the hijack, who puts in the call. Button ends up folding, and after the button folds, I announce that I check in the dark. This 3 of diamonds doesn't change anything, and neither of the draws completed, so if our opponent fires big here, we're definitely going to put in the call very quickly. And as I'm having this thought, our opponent announces 85. I throw in a single chip to signify that I'm calling. He says good call. I'm not interested in seeing the loser, so I show our ace, and obviously it's good. Besides that, there wasn't any other real interesting hand to break down in the session. We did end up scooping one more small pot with pocket 10s, but that pretty much wraps up the session. Let's jump over to the stats. All right, ladies and gents, as promised, we will be going over the session stats for you, but not before my dog makes a guest appearance. Yep, and there she is. All right, out of here. All right, for this session, we bought in for $12.20, significantly more than our original buy-in, and we cashed out $10.25, so a total loss of $195. We played from 5:30 in the afternoon until 2 in the morning. Rather unfortunate, to be honest, but what can you do? A lot better than being stuck a couple hundred, but we definitely should have gotten up when we were up a good amount. Like I've mentioned many a time, we're back in bankroll building mode, so we have to be a little bit tighter right now while we try to build our bankroll back up. Still have enough to play with, to be honest, so we can take these losses, but we had far more before. And if we want to go back to Vegas next year during the summer and play during the series, potentially play some other events at the end of the year, who knows? Honestly, I don't think that's a bad goal. I think if we can get back to 10K again, we might fire a couple bullets at some big tournaments near the end of the year. I'm sure we can find something down in either Los Angeles, maybe up in San Jose, or even up in the Bay. There's got to be some sort of circuit that's coming up in the near future. So let's look forward to that. Anyhow, thank you guys for stopping by. Please make sure to like, follow, and sub if you have not already. And thank you for being patient and waiting for the video drop. I know it's a couple days late. We're still on track for this week's video later on. Unfortunately, we just had a lot of prior commitments over the weekend, so I wasn't able to film the intro and outro for this video. So even though 90% of it was done, I could not upload it until tonight. Anyhow, we'll catch you guys next time. I hope you have a good week. See you on the felt.